So I segue a little bit away from the transportation issue. My topic is willingness. My name's Wendy O'Connor, by the way. I do communications for our groups, and in the course of doing those communications, I learned more on the issue, and I became active in it myself as well. The issue of willingness and consent is important to us up here in northwestern Ontario because it concerns us locally, but it ties in with the transportation issue because we've seen what a long route the waste would take to get up here. And there's no indication from the NWMO that the people along that route would be part of the willingness process, or whether they would be canvassed in any way for their willingness or their consent. As it stands right now, it's Ignace and the community of Wabigoon Ojibwe Nation that the NWMO says must give consent for this. And this goes back to many years ago, Ignace having put up its hand in part of a process to see which communities were interested in what they call hosting the waste. So Ignace initiated that process by putting up their hand. And we'll get into that in a minute. It gives them more agency over this perhaps than Dryden has, and you have to ask if that's fair. So the NWMO says the project will only proceed in an area with informed and willing hosts. They set the bar pretty high, actually, where the municipality, First Nation, and Métis communities and others in the area are working together to implement it. So not just saying yes, but actually working together. And on TV on Monday night, Vince Ponca also added that it would be hard for this project to go ahead if Dryden wasn't pretty excited and if Thunder Bay wasn't pretty excited. But you have to ask yourself, how do we measure pretty excited? And how do we measure the consent or willingness of communities closer by, like Ignace and Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation? So who ought to be willing? The NWMO has designated the township of Ignace with a voting population of about 1,000 voting adults as the host community. And I just mentioned the process that brought us to that point. But we should note that the project is not actually located in the township of Ignace. It's in a neighboring township, an unorganized township, and that Ignace itself is not in the project's watershed. So Ignace would not be bearing the risk that people in the watershed would, and that includes Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, Grassy Narrows, Dryden, Kenora, and onwards towards Lake Winnipeg and out to Hudson Bay. Now, you don't have much population past Winnipeg up to Hudson Bay, but those nearby communities could certainly be affected. And there's no plan to consult them in the same way that Ignace and Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation would be consulted. The nearby city of Dryden is not considered a host community, although it is in the watershed, and it has 5 times the voting population of Ignace. So Dryden is actually taking notice of this at this point. NWMO conducts educational activities all around the region, including in Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation and other First Nations communities and other communities around and about. It's unclear how Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation's willingness will be assessed. We have some details now on how Ignace's willingness is to be assessed. And as I mentioned, the next thing is who ought to be willing. There's no indication that any other potentially affected group of people, such as those in the watershed or along the transportation route, will have a say. And you have to ask yourself, is it appropriate that the NWMO, who is an association of nuclear power producers, so they're an industry association, they're not working specifically in the public interest, should they make the rules here? And we just broach these as open questions. We don't have the answers to those, but it's something you should think about because we sense something unjust. How should willingness be expressed or determined? And this is a sticky one. You know, I don't blame the NWMO perhaps for not having a lot of details on this because it is a difficult one for all of us. But the onus is on them to refine this and have the details for us. That would be socially responsible. In December 2021, the Township of Ignace's past council, so that's the last one before the current one, resolved that council itself would make the determination of willingness in their community and express that to the NWMO when the time came. So at that time, the decision of council was that residents would not have the opportunity to vote in a referendum, and the current council could reverse that if the population pressed for it. Interestingly enough, in South Bruce, the other potential community for this repository, the citizens did press for a referendum, and they'll be having that early in 2024. So currently, Ignace's plan, and this has just come out in the last few weeks, is to have hired consultants visit residents door to door, and after a few visits, so repeated visits, they will record their response to the project.
They should have gone out last night on Halloween.
That might have been fruitful. So that brings to mind several questions. Will they reach all of the population? Will people wish to answer their doors? Will people wish to speak to these people several times? Or will marginalized people, fearful people, any number of people not open their doors and not be counted? And the next thing that comes to my mind is on those repeated visits, what are those visits for? They want to make sure that they say they want to make sure the citizens are informed before they give a response. So what information is going to be shared at those repeated door-to-door visits? And we have no information on that. But I'm expecting it's NWMO's information that will be shared there. So that comes back to the what we think of as informed. Informed by whom? Because we'd like people to have a broad basis of information and not just to get it from one agency. Another issue in willingness and consent is money that's pouring in, gifts that are being given. NWMO has funded millions of dollars worth of community projects in Ignace and Dryden and in Northwestern Ontario Indigenous communities as part of Learn More agreements. And some of that money, fair enough, is designated to be used for the expenses these communities may incur in the process of dealing with the NWMO, consultations, etc., room rentals, and that's fair enough. But the majority of the money is usually for what they call near-term investment. So that means any reasonable thing that the community wants to use it for in the near term, it's a gift. So you have to ask yourself, is it appropriate that the NWMO, who have a vested interest in putting this waste out of sight, be allowed to use our money, hydro ratepayers' money, to influence government and community organizations in these places? I don't think most of us expected our money to be used for persuasion. The next thing is with regards to First Nations communities, and I'll get down to UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the bottom there. But it smacks of colonialism when NWMO goes into First Nations communities with these gifts. They say it's not bribery because they don't demand anything back. But is it really free consent when gifts are given? Because they are meant to persuade. So that's something that weighs on us when we consider these things. Many of these First Nations communities are in the project's watershed, so the stakes are high for them, much higher than they are actually for the Township of Ignace. And are the principles of that Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Canada has endorsed that declaration, are they embodied in the process? Article 29 states that states shall take effective measures to ensure that no storage or disposal of hazardous materials shall take place in the lands or territories of Indigenous peoples without their free, prior, and informed consent. Now, prior is not too hard, but what constitutes free consent? Is that process eroded by this gift giving? And what constitutes informed consent? Who should the information come from? And just my second last slide here, just so you know that we're not just anti-everything. We do have an alternative to all this. And it seems to us a common sense alternative. It's so common sense it calls into question the craziness of this whole proposal. Our group advocates management of the existing nuclear fuel waste near the points of production, similar to the way it's stored now in interim facilities, but not exactly the same. And as Dodie and Bernine pointed out, 90% of Canada's nuclear fuel waste is in southern Ontario. It's currently managed nearby the reactors. Even moving it up here would never remove that risk because it has to stay in wet storage for up to 10 years, sometimes longer. In these interim facilities, we advocate management in long-term secure facilities near the reactors where the containment can be monitored. So just make that containment long-term. It was built for interim, it's been there for 50 years. Remake it into long-term containment, move it a bit further from the shores of the Great Lakes. This seems so much easier than shipping it up here with all these attendant risks and questions. Rushing to bury this radioactive legacy at great risk to the people and the environment is not necessary. It's not the answer. So what can we do? We had a question from the audience earlier on how to take action, and I'm glad you're eager to do so. First, gather information from all kinds of sources. I'm glad to see you're here tonight, and you've gathered information from us. You can get more detailed information with references from our website, wethenuclearfreenorth.ca, and I have a few suggestions at the side there. Take action, do your research, learn from many sources, and stay informed. Read the newspaper, go online, see what you find. There's plenty of downright awful stuff, but I trust you to be able to sift it out and find the reliable resources, referenced information. Talk about it with your friends and family so they're aware of the issues and what's at stake. Speak with your elected representatives. Speak with your city councillors. Speak with your MPPs. Go to your MPs, Pawlowski and Haidu. They need to hear from you, and they need to know that this is important to you. Express opposition with signage. We've got some window posters you can take home. In the spring, we'll be doing a real push to get lawn signs out again after the snow starts to melt. And also write a letter to the editor. We have a lot of good letter writers writing in, and a lot of people read those. Go on social media. Make your voice heard in any way you can. So thanks for listening to our presentations, and now we welcome your questions.